Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this series of conversations with authors, writers, poets, and other creative thinkers. We have called it Humanity 2.0. And this event has been conceived by Justice Collective, which is a blogging platform for insights and opinions on a broad spectrum of issues coming under the justice theme, and is being hosted in collaboration with the End Bonded Labor page as a live event here on Facebook. What is End Bonded Labor? It is a shared digital platform for different stakeholders who are working on the issue of human trafficking and bonded labor. And it makes for a shared pool of resources. So today, it is my privilege, and I consider it my honor, to engage a very, very special guest in a conversation which I believe will be as fulfilling as reading an unput-downable book on a rainy afternoon with a cup of masala chai in hand. Amin Haq has, over the past decade or so, created an instant recall for himself as the storywala, the man with the stories. And you will find out more about him and his kahani in conversations which follow. And so without further ado, welcome Amin.
Hi, Prashanti, thank you so much. Looking forward, equally excited.
Good evening again to you as well. And so how have you looked at this invitation? What was going on in your mind when you had an invitation to share about yourself and about storywalas and about storytelling on a live event?
With repetition and with a lot of nervousness and anxiety. You may want to laugh and smile at this, but actually, every time I have to speak, I feel nervous, especially when I have to speak about storywalas or storytelling, because I see that as a huge responsibility. As a spokesperson for storytelling, I see that as a very, very big responsibility, and I always approach such talks with repetition. So thank you for putting me in the hot seat.
Well, it is our privilege actually, because we've heard so much about you. And like I said, every time the word storytelling or story comes up, the name Amin Haq pops up in our conversations. So Amin, it is a very catchy phrase or a name for what you have started, with this whole initiative with storytelling. So maybe you could start us off by telling us what compelled you to get into a space like storytelling in the way that you have.
I really wish I had a fantastic story about that, which I could tell you. Which is that, one day I had an epiphany and next morning Storywalas was born. But I don't really have a romantic story around this. The fact is I had worked in advertising for a very long time in my life, and advertising is, in one way, it is storytelling. It's where you tell stories, and through stories you try to influence choices. A lot of people think about advertising as where you make ads for soaps or shampoos. That's true. But what's also true is you create communication strategy that helps brands win in the marketplace. And when I say brands, there could be product brands, service brands. I worked on IBM, I worked on Lenovo, I worked on Titan, I worked on HSBC. Now, when I say HSBC, on the communication strategy for HSBC and how it should communicate to its customers. And I worked on the launch of General Motors in India. Now, that teaches you a lot because, take Bang, for example. When a new restaurant opens in the neighborhood, we feel like going and eating at the new restaurant. When a new movie comes to town, we feel like going and watching that new movie. But when a new bank comes to the neighborhood, you don't say, let me go and open an account in that bank. When a new insurance seller comes into the market, you don't say, let me go and buy a new insurance. There's a new player offering it. Wow. So a lot of my work revolved around new launches. And how do you influence through communication strategy for people to buy into a new idea and get them to vote with the note, with the money? And that got me interested in this entire idea of behavioral economics as to what influences people. And there I learned about how powerful stories are. And so at one level, that interest and engagement with storytelling was already a part of my previous life in advertising. And in the evenings, I used to do theater. So, most people have one job in life. I had two. During the day, I used to work in advertising. Post work, in the evenings, I used to go and work in theater, which is also storytelling, but of a different kind. So willy nilly, I was working with stories uh, without realizing it for a long part of my life, and this seemed like a natural extension.
So actually, you touched upon two very important thoughts in what you were explaining. I mean, the first being that the fact that you were in advertising, uh, and advertising is a form of storytelling. That had that sparked a question in my mind about how a lot of storytelling or a lot of when people associate um, storytelling to something which is untrue, which is fictional, which is imagination, or which is creative. And then we try to say that storytelling is also about real things, about non-fictional realities or issues. There seems to be a little bit of hesitation for people to accept it. So how do you tie the two, or how do you see a way for us to be able to bridge that gap?
Well, storytelling is a big word. And when I say a big word, it's a very open word. It's a very inclusive word, and it includes a lot. When Harsha Bhogle does fantastic commentary, we say, "What powerful storytelling!" Uh, when a writer in a newspaper or a journalist writes a fantastic article or an expose or a beautiful story on a specific topic, we say, "Wow, what a fantastic story!" So reporting is also story. Fiction writers, Chetan Bhagat, storyteller. Spiritual leader, Gaur Gopal Das, storyteller. Uh, Political leader, Narendra Modi, storyteller. Uh, uh, and a good business leader like Indra Nui, storyteller. Movie director, Anurag Kashyap, storyteller. So storytelling in that sense is a wide canvas word that includes fictional narratives, that includes uh, many kinds of performance art, and it also includes uh, people with the ability to tell the stories of their work. I don't worry too much about excluding the other aspects of story. The only thing that I point out to people when somebody makes an excuse and they say, "Oh, now he's telling a story," I say, "No, no, that's not a story. That's an excuse." When somebody tells a lie and you say, "Oh, now he's telling a story," no, that's not a story. That's a lie. A story is a story. That's different.
Well, see, I love the way you've articulated that. And you said a story is a story, a lie is a lie. Yes. And often, I think, in the mind of the general public, I think for us to, equate a story as something which is, like I said, imagination or fictional. But also very closely related to what we are saying right now, what we are speaking about. Isn't everyone a storyteller? I mean,
So let me answer both of these and let me respond a little bit more to the previous question and then answer this question as well. Um, yes, everything is a story except lies, except fake news. Fake news is not a story; it is fake news. Uh, Having said that, the fiction that works and connects with people. If you think about it, why does fiction connect with people? Why does science fiction connect with people, which is not yet happened? It's set in the future. Why does that connect with people? Why does an imaginary world uh, take the movie Avatar? It's an imaginary world. It's taking place in some other sphere. Why would that connect with people? And you will find that even these imaginary tales that connect with people are based on some universal truth. And that truth is inside. It is based on some hope that we have. or a fear that we have, and it speaks to that real fear or it speaks to that hope. So even the fiction stories that work, they work because there is some element of truth there. So in that sense, good stories, they are all truthful in a larger sense. They are anchored in some truth. And which is why I say that stories are truth well told. There are two parts to that. The first part is truth. The other part is well told, which is articulation, because we live in an attention deficit world and not everybody is coming to seek your truth. So you have to go out there and find a way of communicating it in a way that makes an impact, that gets noticed. Now, the second one that you said, everybody, is everyone a storyteller? Yes, of course. We are all born storytellers. Will you run for your life if there's a snake running after you? Could you answer that for me, please?
I would.
You would. Does that make you Usain Bolt?
No.
Do you sing once in a while?
Yes, I do. But that
Does that
doesn't make me.
Lata Mangeshkar or Asha Bhosle? So at some level, we are all storytellers. Yes, absolutely. But we are also runners, like we all run for our life, or if a thief, steals our mobile phone and he's running ahead of us, we'll run like faster than we have ever run in our lives. But that doesn't make us Usain Bolt. We sing in the bathroom and we sing occasionally, but that doesn't make us a singer. Similarly, all of us are born with the ability to tell stories. But storytelling is a muscle. So it's a muscle we are born with. Just like, marathoners aren't born running. They will start running the moment they are born, but they exercise that muscle more than most people do. Singers exercise their muscle, their voice more than most people do. Similarly, storytelling is a practice. We are all born with the ability for that practice. And the more we practice that, the better we become. It's like a knife. You don't use it, it gets rusted.
I think that is one of the most poignant explanations that I have ever heard. And coming from a storyteller himself, that it is a muscle that we exercise. So, as a storyteller myself, I have often had, faced with this. I've often faced people saying this, that everybody is a storyteller, and so then my next question is, then when do we say that we are able to separate the story from the storyteller? Is it possible?
Uh, at one level, no. So everybody is a storyteller, but like Yuval Noah Harari says in his book, The Sapiens, that human beings are the only species who have the ability to imagine alternate reality. We can imagine an alternate world which doesn't exist yet, but we hope that we can create that. Every social impact organization is bought every social impact, every NGO is born, every change maker, it becomes a change maker with an alternate reality in mind, with some conception of alternate reality, buying into a story that does not yet exist. So in that sense, we are all, you're absolutely right, but we tell stories to ourselves. To be able to tell stories to others convincingly, that requires practicing of the muscle. So there's there is that difference. Otherwise, we tell stories to ourselves all the time. And one of the most powerful quotes on storytelling that I have come across is that we become the stories we tell ourselves. So, uh, and if we become the stories that we tell ourselves, that answers your other question as well. Is it possible to separate the story from the storyteller then?
So, with that thought in mind, let us take a small, short walk down memory lane, maybe for you, Amin, and maybe you can just tell us a little bit about how you got into this whole the beautiful world of stories and storytelling. What was your childhood like?
So, my mother was a teacher, and books always had an important place in our household. As a child, I used to stammer a little bit, and therefore I was not the confident, outgoing, outspoken child. Rather, I was the introvert, reserved, shy child. Many times in the class, despite knowing the answer to the question that the teacher was asking, I wouldn't raise my hand because raising the hand would mean that you would be made to stand up and everyone would look at you and I would take a long time to answer the question. So that was what my childhood was like. But I was, growing up on stories. Uh, so we used to get the Illustrated Weekly at home. There was a cartoon there. I used to read another magazine called Dharmayug, a Hindi uh, magazine which had a cartoon strip in it. Um, and then we had the Famous Five and the Secret Seven. Uh, we had the Indrajal comics that I was a huge fan of, and the Amar Chitra Kathas. So all of that was part of my childhood. But around grade sixth or seventh, because of my stammer and because of my shy, reserved nature, my mother, she decided to take some affirmative action, and she enrolled me into speech therapy and she enrolled me into theater and as in school dramatic society, and she enrolled me into poetry recitation and debate competitions and elocutions and boy scouts and national cadet corps and extracurricular activities. Think of it like comprehensive damage control strategy. I I, to be honest, I was completely out of my comfort zone. I completely hated it. But when I look back now, I am very, very grateful to my mother because all of these things helped me a lot, especially speech therapy and theater. And a lot of people grow out of their out of their stammer by adolescence. I'm lucky that I got out of my stammer by the time I was an adolescent. But I fell in love with theater. My first role in a school play was to play a dead body. And
Did you have to speak?
it's not an easy one to pull off though, because you have to lie on stage for 1 hour. And you remember the schools that we had, right? Mosquitoes and flies buzzing around, and you have to lie still. But I pulled off that part well. I must have dozed off. Next role that I got was that of a sentry. I had a one-word role. I just had to say "Savdhan." That was it. But theater gave me a lot of confidence, and it became a large part of my life in high school, a large part of my life in college, and after that, during my working years as well. And then advertising. So,
So yes. Um, well, after school and then advertising, and then which part of your life did Storywalas happen? Maybe you could. Was there anything specific that led to Storywalas coming onto the scene?
yeah. So, like I was saying, I've worked a long stint in advertising and was wondering where to go next and what to do next. Uh, I live in Bangalore, and when you rise up in advertising, then most roles led towards Mumbai or Delhi as national heads, and I wasn't willing to make that move to either Mumbai or Delhi, and I was wondering what to do next. Um I stumbled upon performance storytelling in the sense that one of my team members who used to work with me at Ogilvy, Sarika Menon, she said, I'm going to do a course at Kathalaya. And I said, what's that? She said, it's a storytelling academy. So I said, I'll also come along. How many days will we have to take off from office? Why don't I come along? She had actually applied for leave. She was part of my team. And then I said, I'll also apply for leave and I'll also come. And then both of us went and did that course. And there I met Geeta, who's the founder of Kathalaya. And I
Right.
asked, so Geeta, what do you do? And she said, I do storytelling. I said, that must be your hobby, but how do you sustain yourself? And she said, this is what I do. I said, seriously? You are able to sustain yourself doing just this? And she said, yeah, I tell stories and I teach storytelling. And I thought, well, if Geeta can do this, I can do this too. So there was that sense of hesitation, of course, because we all come from middle class backgrounds, and then you don't want to take a risk. I don't have an entrepreneurial bone in my family. My brother works at Deloitte. My mother was a teacher. So, uh, but I took that step in a fit of madness, and I am grateful for that.
And I think the storytelling world is also grateful that you took that leap of faith almost. And in fact, you answered a question that Priyanka had asked from the audience. She said, how did you make that leap from advertising to storytelling? And I think you just covered that so beautifully. And so, yes, we are glad that you made that leap.
So Priyanka, it requires a little bit of madness, and I still remember the conversation I had with my mother. So I went to my mother, and when I went to my mother and told her that this is what I plan to do, I plan to leave my job and start Storywalas. She asked me three questions. The first question she asked me is, full of sarcasm. She said, uh, "So what will you do exactly?" And I said, "I'll tell stories and I'll teach people how to be storytellers." Nice, very nice. What a noble thought. Then the second question she asked is, will people actually pay you for this? So I said, Mom, I have no clue. There's only one way of finding out by doing it. But at this stage, I don't know. Yeah, yeah, of course. Of course. At this stage, there is no way of knowing. Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. You have no clue right now whether you will make money or not. And the third question she asked is, have you gone out of your mind?
I think we
So,
can all.
and of course, it's not her fault. Our parents have grown up at a time of scarcity in India, and they wish us well, and that's where she was coming from. Uh, but you need to listen to your heart, and sometimes you need to listen to it more than what your mind says, and hopefully things work out. In my case, they worked out. Uh, but circumstances and luck, right place, right time, I think all of them play a part. And one should not be, you know, when one succeeds, one should not be too carried away with success by saying that, I've had a great role to play in this. And when one fails, one should not be too harsh on oneself. Uh, Birth itself is such a big accident. The family that you are born into is a lottery. And then to take credit for many things in life just based on that lottery, it just seems unfair and wrong, right? You could have been born in the US in someone's house, but you were born in India in someone's house. You could have been born in Afghanistan in someone's house, or in Bangladesh, or in Vietnam, but you were born in India. You could have been born in Ambani's house, but that accident didn't happen. The accident that did happen, that we don't choose the skin color we are born with. We don't choose the gender we are born with. We don't choose the religion we are born into. We don't choose the economic class we are born into. Birth is the biggest lottery. And then to take credit for that lottery, it just sounds stupid. I am grateful for the lotteries I've had in my life.
I think yes, that makes complete. That you pulled us into your story so effectively, Amin, and maybe continuing with that. Like we're getting pulled into your story. Maybe you could also just. You sound so philosophic as well. I mean, is this something that gets that creeps into your storytelling as well? Your philosophic attitude or outlook towards life?
Well, at one level, you can't separate, every storyteller has a bias, and we are all biased. We all have a worldview, and therefore, we choose the stories that we want to tell, and we tell them in the way we want to tell them. And that's how the storyteller's bias comes into play. Just like as a singer, if you have a great voice, and many music directors come to you, you will say, hey, I don't want to do that, that particular while I like item songs, but this particular one, it just crosses the line too much, and I'm not comfortable with that. That's not my sensibility. And I don't also want to do a bhajan because that's not my sensibility, but I'd rather sing these songs. So, and for somebody else, they may just want to be a devotional singer, and somebody else may want to just do other kind of songs. So you may have your skill and your craft, but there will always be a bias, and that will choose or the bias will impact the kind of work you are drawn towards.
Since we have been speaking about Storywalas, I will ask you another question about Storywalas. And you offer a lot of services as part of what Storywalas offer in the whole realm or under the umbrella of storytelling. What was the way people received the services that you were actually talking about? Was the market or was the storyscape ready for you and Storywalas when it happened? And do you think that things have changed since then?
Yes, they have changed a lot since then, and in the sense that the market has expanded and grown tremendously. There's room for a lot of players. We were one of the early ones, and it's also, storytelling is a far more common buzzword than it was back in the days.
Right.
But the kind of work that we do, we are very greedy people. So we like width as well as depth. And that's what I mean by greed, because we are yet not willing to give up one for the other. So we try to do width and we try to do depth. What does that mean? The variety of work that we do with stories, we call ourselves a, a university of storytelling in some way. And why I mean university and not a college, uh, is that university would have different kind of courses on offer. So there'd be a medical college and there'd be an engineering college, and they're very different, but they are all learning systems. So similarly, we see ourselves as a university of storytelling. What does that mean? Uh, we like to teach storytelling and we like to help people become better storytellers themselves. That's the whole coaching element. And we tell stories. So these are the three things we do. We tell stories, we teach storytelling, and help people discover the storyteller within. We exercise their muscles so that they become better storytellers and give them techniques and frameworks. But the application area is very, very wide. So we work with a CEO and help them get their story right, go to market. We work with a VC firm or a startup founder and help them pitch their story so that they can raise funds. We work with NGOs. We work with change makers. We've even worked with sports commentators and help them get their storytelling, or help them elevate their storytelling or reflect on their storytelling. We work with teachers, school teachers. So the application area is fairly wide, and we don't want to cut back on that. That diversity of work enriches. When we work with change makers, it enriches what we do with startup founders. And when we work with startup founders, we are able to apply that to social impact. Fundraising is important for startup founders. It's important for social sector as well. So this range of work actually deepens our understanding of storytelling and helps us pass that on in a much better way.
Right, right. In many of the presentations that you've made over the years, Amin, and I have actually, gone through quite a few of your presentations, listened to them. You've often spoken about the power of storytelling. How would you break that down for us?
Two or three levels to keep it simple. Number one, stories are memorable in the sense that facts are forgotten, but stories are remembered. Do you remember the Pythagoras theorem? Can you tell me what's the Pythagoras theorem? No,
Math
sorry,
was not my,
sorry,
yeah.
I'm not using on screen in front of a lot of people, but the idea is not to embarrass you here. Most of us are in the same boat. Do you remember the Archimedes principle?
I remember the name, yes.
Yeah, the name, but the Archimedes principle, no. Do you remember the formula for gravity?
No.
No. Okay, but these were important questions during seventh grade, eighth grade, and your success depended on understanding these and answering these well. So You learned them by rote, perhaps, and despite all that effort, you've forgotten them. Now let's do this all over again. Do you remember a story called The Thirsty Crow?
Yes.
Do you remember a story about the hare and the tortoise?
Yes.
But that comes from a time much earlier. And, you know, no marks, seventh grade, eighth grade, 10th, success in 10th didn't depend on that. Yet you remember it. Why? Now, let's talk about the subjects we spoke about. You may not remember the formula for gravity, but don't you remember the story about a man sitting under a tree and an apple falling on his head? Newton. Yes. You may not remember the Archimedes principle, which deals with buoyancy and in an interesting way, which is if you take a huge, massive a tub, big tub, like a tank, and put a lot of water into that tank, you fill it with water, and you put a safety pin into that, a very small object, it will sink in a second or a few seconds to the bottom. But you put a heavy object like a boat and it floats. Now, why is it that a heavy object floats and a light object sinks? That's what Archimedes explained. But we forget that. What we remember is the naked man running down the street shouting Eureka. The human mind is hardwired to remember stories. You give people facts about poverty, they'll forget. Tell them a story, they will remember. You give them data, they'll forget. You tell them a story that they will remember. We live in a world that is an attention deficit world. We are surrounded by information. So the mind blanks out a lot of noise. What goes in and sticks, the ear is like a filtering device. It is filtering out noise. It's filtering out, saying too much, I can't deal with it. What makes way through this is a story, and that sticks. And when we talk about impact, if you can't remember it, if your audience can't remember it, you made no impact. So you want to make impact, tell a story. So I'm breaking it down for you. So the number one reason stories are powerful is because stories are remembered, facts are forgotten. Now let's look at number two. When we say impact, what do we want people to do? We want to influence people. You know, when we use stories in a non-fiction sense, advertising, for example, fundraising story, social impact story, for either for stakeholder or for donor. What do we want to do? We want to influence something. We want to influence a change. We want people to change behavior. Say, don't throw garbage out, wear seatbelt. All of us, all of those stories have to lead to some kind of a action. So where do actions come from? So that led us to look at what is the research on what shapes actions. How do people decide? And that's decision science, that's behavioral economics. And if you look up, last year the Nobel Prize on economics was won by the Nobel Prize on economics was won by Richard Thaler for his thesis Nudge. The book Nudge. And you understand the word nudge. Somebody is sitting on the fence. How do we nudge them into taking a decision? And what is he saying there? And what are all the books on decision science or behavioral economics telling us? That people decide from here. I wouldn't like to break it down by saying that there are two parts to the brain, the right and the left, but people decide from the emotional side. They rationalize from the logical side, and they rationalize that decision. And when I say emotional side, this is not the correct articulation. Let me give you the correct articulation that economists use. They say the emotional side is predominant in decision making, which means that the rational side is equally at play, but the emotional side is predominant. Now, why am I highlighting that? Because stories speak to emotions. That's what stories are all about. So you want to influence change, use stories. That's the power of story. The third thing, and one can go on and on, but I'll just stop at the third one. If you want to command a higher premium, tell a story. Every brand, that every movement, everything that commands a high premium. And when I say premium, it's not price. Loyalty is also premium. Today, anything that's rare is a premium, right? When you fight with your girlfriend or boyfriend, you don't go and, how many of the people who are listening to this have done this? They have gone and stood outside the door of their girlfriend and boyfriend for 2 days. You don't do that. But before an iPhone is launched, people are standing outside the store for 2 days to be the first one to lay hands. That's the world that we live in. We don't do it for human beings, but we are willing to do it for a brand that tells a great story. So loyalty is at a premium. It's not just price, right? And if you look at any movement, any brand that commands a premium, and radical movements, radical thought also commands a premium. There you pay with your life many times. But anything that commands a premium tells a story.
That is so beautifully articulated, Amin. That also just, is the right time for me to ask you a question from one of our viewers. It's Zotanpui Varte, who asks you, Amin, what are ways to take facts and turn them into stories which people will listen to?
Well, good stories have, let me walk you through an example here, and then we'll derive the principles from there. This is a good question. Now, the example I'm going to take is a very popular one. There's a viral video, or a video that has gone viral on YouTube. It's called the Power of Words video. In this video, you will see that there is a blind man, somebody who's visually handicapped, and he is asking for money. And he's got a play card. He's got a board that is put up with a begging bowl. And the play card says, "I am blind, please help." So going back to the question, the facts are there in the story. I'm blind, that's the fact. And he's put the fact into the story, and he's got a one slider. If you were to think of PowerPoint, think of it as one slide story, right? You have to tell your story very quickly. So he's got one slide. I am blind, please help. He's using the magic words that we teach children, please. But that story doesn't work because people are passing by and they don't put money. Then a lady comes and she decides to change the board, and she writes on the other side. And once she writes on the other side, whatever she's written, magic happens and people start putting in money. Later, when the lady comes back, this guy asks her, "What did you do to my sign? What did you write?" And she says, "I wrote the same thing, but different words." Now, what are the words now? And the camera zooms in and you see the words say, "It's a beautiful day and I can't see it." So let me answer your question now through this example and derive some principles from here. How do we weave facts into narrative? Number one, the first story had all the facts, but it was not speaking to emotion. It was just bland. I'm blind, please help. But when you say it's a beautiful day and I can't see it, that story hits you here. So number one, leverage the fact, but don't keep it at the fact level. That's why I gave you that definition, truth well told. There are two parts to a story, truth and well told. There was only truth in what he was saying. I am blind. There was no well told. So bring in the second part. The second problem with his story was, if you look at the story construct, what is the first word in that story? I am blind. What is the first word? I am blind. Please help. That story is all about him. Where is the viewer in that story and why should someone care? So that story does not bring the other person in. But in the other story, she says, it's a beautiful day. Who can see that? The blind person cannot see that. It's you. And you start nodding in agreement and say, yeah, it's a beautiful day. So move the story from I story to we story. Bring the viewer in. Don't tell the story. Lot of organizations or individuals tell the story from I perspective. This is my department. This is my NGO. This is the work that we are doing. But why should the other person care? So bring them into the story. Get them to nod in agreement. That's the second part. The third part is very simple. It's not what we say, but also how we say it that makes a difference. Like the lady said, I wrote the same, but differently. And that makes all the difference. Think about it. He was saying, I am blind, which is take pity on me. He was working from a place called sympathy. She changes that to a place called empathy, which is powerful. Not just that, he was saying, take pity on me. She says, you are lucky. She says, it's a beautiful day. She makes you realize that your eyes, you got eyes, something that you take for granted, but for a second, just pause. You've got eyes. You can see it's a beautiful day. I can't. She makes you feel good for what you have. And feeling gratitude for and feeling lucky and blessed, you open your wallet and take money out. To me, it's a masterclass in storytelling. So these are the 5 principles, though. What the lady does is a masterclass in storytelling, but these are the 5 principles. Speak to people's emotions. Number 2, go from I to we. Truth, well told. It's not what we say, but how we say it. And it's not about, move from sympathy to empathy.
Yes, Amin. So I have seen you use this particular illustration in quite a few of your conversations with various stakeholders, not just the same kind of audiences. And it has always created that instant connect. I think even in the listeners. This just kind of also sets the stage for me to ask you another audience question. It's from Ignatius Pekikara, who asks you this question. How do you think stories can lead to change for social issues? How best can storytellers leverage stories?
Okay, so it's a difficult question. Social change has never been easy, but look up. It's not just social change. Any change in the world has not been easy at one level. We are all prisoners of habit, all of us as human beings. So this is fact number 1. I'll also share fact number 2. Like all of us are prisoners of habit. If you are used to reading the Hindu as a newspaper, and I give you the Times of India as your newspaper vendor, and I leave Times of India at your doorstep, you will say, hey, 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 give me my regular newspaper. Aren't you locked in habit? And it's not easy for you to change your habit. If you're a green tea drinker, and if I give you filter coffee, you'll go, or vice versa. If you smoke a particular brand of cigarette, if I give you another cigarette, you will not want to smoke that. So we are all prisoners of habit. And it's not easy to make people change their habits. At the same time, now this is the second fact that I'm going to come to. The human species has survived only because it has adapted. So both of these are true. It's not like black zero. It's not zero sum that 0 1. Both of these are truths that we resist change, yet we have survived only because we have embraced change. The question is, do we proactively embrace it or not? Because for survival, we will certainly do what is necessary for our survival. But can we embrace change to make the world better? That's not easy. Look at social communication and that, so if you want to improve, I would say, don't just look at success stories. Look at failure stories and ask yourself, why did the campaign on Hum Do Hamare Do fail? Why did it fail? Why is it that we encourage people to wear the seat belt and there's a lot of money spent in advertising and communication by the government, encouraging people to wear helmets, encouraging people to wear seat belts, which is at some level you'd wonder, why do we need to encourage them? It is in their own self-interest. Why do we have to spend the taxpayers' money on something like this? But people don't do that. So study the failures of communication campaigns and say why they are not working. What is it? What is the belief system that these stories work against? If we don't understand that belief system, then it's not going to bring about. So where do actions come from? Speaking of belief systems, actions come from belief systems, and belief systems come from stories. I'll give you a simple example. In India, you know, Hinduism is the sort of dominant way of life because of the demographics. So at some level, it rubs off on all of us who grow up. So I'll speak of a simple example from a cultural perspective. If you happen to, walk by a crowded area and you touch someone with your feet by mistake, what do? You don't go back and say, hey, buddy, sorry. In fact, you lean forward and you touch that person's lower part of the body and touch it to your heart or head and say sorry, right? That's what we do in Indian culture. Why do we touch someone's feet? If we touch them by mistake, chalte chalte pair lag gaya kisi ko, why do we bend down and touch the lower part? Because of a belief system. The belief system is that God resides in everyone, and you have just touched a God with the lowest part of your body. So we don't say, hey, sorry. We bend down and touch the lower part of that person's body and touch it back to the uppermost part of your body, so that these two gods are back in equilibrium. Actions come from belief systems, and belief systems come from the stories we buy into. So if you want to change the world, change the story that it believes in. That's where we need to start. That what is the story these people believe? When you change the story, then you can impact the belief system. When you change the belief system, then behaviors will change automatically. The reasons behaviors don't change is because belief systems have not been addressed. So just to conclude, if you just keep addressing the behaviors, that communication will not work. You have to address the belief system and the stories.
Right. So you are saying that there is something about the listeners of stories as well. And that's a question actually that Princey Joseph has asked, saying, what have you found about story listeners and what is the way to their heart?
Is to tell an authentic story in a way that brings them into the story. Uh, so let me break this up into two parts: authenticity and bringing them into the story. Why is authenticity important? Because everyone's a storyteller, like Prashanti said earlier. And there's too many stories. But what connects? What is the story that stands the test of time? So many Facebook messages every day, so many tweets every day, so many Instagram posts every day. We are surrounded by stories and drowning with stories. What is the story that stands the test of time? Authentic story. And what's authentic? Two, three things that makes a story authentic. It's not the story that you tell about yourself, but it's a story that you live in actions. Your deeds speak louder than the words. Take Gandhi, for example. Gandhi said, boycott the British produce. He didn't just say it. He wove the garment that he was wearing on the charkha. Story is not for telling. Story is for doing. Story is for living. He lived the story. It was not just articulation for him. When he said, let's break the rule on salt, he didn't just push people to do that. He was not leading from the back. He was leading from the front. He took the first blow of lathi on his head. So, he traveled third class with people. So story is not just for telling, story is for living. And that when you demonstrate the story in your actions, it becomes real, it becomes authentic. In the Indian Army, officers have the highest casualty rate. Amongst all the armies in the world, the Indian Army has the highest casualty rate for officers. Why is that? Because like Gandhi, our officers lead from the front. So, Ratan, I'll tell you, give you another Ratan Tata story, for example, or a story about, let's take Ratan Tata. Tata has certain values as a group, and like every group, when you go into their board rooms, conference rooms, you will see those values written, posters, etc. Now the story goes that Ratan Tata, along with some of his senior colleagues, was driving, from one place to another. The car broke down. And usually in India, we use a brake on a long drive like this for a welcome smoke break or to stretch our arms and legs. And that's what people were doing, senior colleagues were doing. But they soon realized that Mr. Ratan Tata is not to be seen. So they went looking for him. Guess where they found him? He was kneeling down on the road, sleeves rolled up, helping the driver change the tire of the car. Values are not just to be advertised on posters in the walls of conference rooms. You have to live those values. That makes a story authentic. Authenticity. The second part is bringing why should people care? It may be an authentic story, but why would somebody care? You conduct a poll, you go down streets of Bangalore or Bombay and ask people where is Niyamgiri, which state is it in? Most people have no clue. I am more worried about my own, people have a lot of things to, we are not a first world country. So people have a lot of issues in their own lives. They have to pay taxes. The 1.5 crore people who pay taxes, they have to pay taxes. Uh, they have to pay tuition fee. They have to pay EMIs. They have to send their kids to school. They have to ensure they do homework. They have to deal with their bosses, the targets they are given at work. They have relationship issues. They have work-life balance issues. They are competing with other people to get a place on the local train, to get a foot on the local train somewhere, to stand somewhere. They are also in the journey of life trying to go from a rented house to a owned house. They have troubles of their own. Why would they worry about what you are concerned about, what you have made your business? So we have to draw them in. We have to, and they have all the, see, start with this assumption that human beings will care for other human beings, but first they will care for themselves and they have enough worries of their own. So we have to make them care. How do we make them care? How do we make them invested in our story? The only way you can make them invested in our story is when we make your story their story too. It cannot remain your story. It has to become their story so that they feel as passionate about it. And that's what good storytellers do. They will make everybody they meet a brand ambassador for themselves and their cause. How can this guy become a brand ambassador for my cause? Which brings me to the third point and the final point. What is the best story that someone can tell? What is the best story about any organization, any individual, any NGO? Not the story that they tell, but a story that someone else tells about them. When you have to go on a holiday, you go to the hotel's website and see these fancy photographs. Do you straight away go ahead and book? No. You go to TripAdvisor to check reviews, because the authentic story is what people are on TripAdvisor are saying about this person, not what the hotel is saying, right? When we have to buy a product on Amazon, what do? We check for reviews. When a lady has to take a cab in Delhi at 10 p.m. at night, Ola or Uber, she will first check the reviews about the driver. What are the other people saying? So we live in a review car. Similarly, the best story about you is not the one you can tell about yourself or the NGO, but other people tell about you. So are you making others storytellers on your behalf? These are the three things that we need to do. Number one, authenticity. Lead with authenticity. Number two, bring other people into the story so that your story becomes their story. Number three, make them ambassadors. Make them the storytellers.
That is, I think you've articulated something that we would not have been able to articulate in our own, with our own words. I mean, thank you so much. Yes. But that also makes me use the 3 points that you have brought up as a bridge into the next segment of what I'm looking at in terms of storytelling, and what I'm hoping you'll be able to throw light on is the responsibility that we as storytellers have, especially when we are telling the stories about someone else. Because not all the stories that we tell would be our own stories. For example, I'm looking at people who cannot tell their own stories, or perhaps who are unable to tell their own stories. So when we are telling stories which actually belong to someone else, what is the sense of responsibility that we have, and how can we be more responsible as storytellers?
So there are two parts to that question. It's a fantastic question. Why can't they tell stories? Let me ask you. Why can't they tell their own stories? Because
Well, sometimes
they are not willing to.
Either that, or they don't have the platform to be able to tell their stories.
So let's break it down into two parts. One, they are not willing to tell the story because of whatever reason. It could be uh, it could be somebody who's a child who's not an adult, and has been forced into commercial sex work for whatever reasons, and then does not want to, or you may not want to bring that person on camera to tell the story. uh, that person may not want to tell the story. Yeah. So, and the other one is they may not have the platform to tell the story. On the latter one, I say give them the platform, teach them storytelling.
Yes.
Who will tell, I can tell Sachin Tendulkar's story very well, but who would you pay to listen to, me or Sachin Tendulkar? If Sachin Tendulkar was telling his or her own story, who would you want to listen to? Jamila wrote a book in 2005, The Autobiography of a Sex Worker. Very, very popular book. Now, would you rather listen to me and my insights and my stories about sex workers and their troubles, or would you listen to Jamila?
Right.
So, wherever possible, give them the platform and teach them storytelling. I think that's our responsibility. If you have, if you're a storyteller, teach the skills. You can, what do you want to do? Do you want to give fish, or would you rather teach people how to fish? So teach them how to fish. Vagina monologues. Why does it work? I'm sure you've seen the play, or if you've not seen the play, you would have heard of the play called Vagina Monologues. Why does it work? It's authentic, it's real. It gets people who are passionate about the cause and who speak about, they believe they own the story. And when they have a young person who speaks about romance and love and lust, they will get a young person to speak about that. But when there's when the story is told from the perspective of an older woman, they actually get a real old woman to speak, a 60-year-old. So, uh, so I would say give the platform as much as possible and teach. And let's not assume. A lot of people in the social sector, and I have this angst, and I will express this angst without really getting angry uh, and controlling my emotions here. But a lot of people say that we have to be the voice. Why? If they can tell the stories, you teach them how to tell the stories. They may not be able to speak perfect English, go ahead and translate it for them. That guy who makes sanitary napkins, on whose life the movie Padman is based, you see his TED talk. If you see his TED talk, you will see that his English is not perfect. He you know really, he is tempted. You can see his temptation to break into Tamil when he speaks. You can see that he's just tempted. He's at the edge. He's struggling for words when he's thinking about something. So you can see that struggle, that he's thinking, he's waiting for that word to appear to him to articulate, but he speaks in his voice, and that story works beautifully. That's what makes it authentic. So there's an organization that I do some mentoring work with. They are called Slam Out Loud. And Slam Out Loud, they teach poetry to children and arts. They do deeper work with arts, but one of the things that they do is they work with poetry, and they gift poetry and the skill of poetry to children who, at one level, many NGOs would believe they don't have a voice of themselves. How can children write poetry? But poetry has always been, and protest poetry particularly, has always been at the heart of change movements. Now they teach poetry to kids, and that when children write poetry, they write it in their own words, their feelings, and their level of expression and their level of imagination. And last year, these kids, were on a slam poetry performance with the most famous and celebrated slam poetry artists from the US who came to India. But they told their story in their own words. In fact, Jigyasa, when she was invited to a festival, Jigyasa is the founder or one of the co-founders, she refuses to go to a TED talk, or she refuses to go to a festival without the children. She says the children will come and they will speak for themselves. I'm only an enabler. And I think we should all of us should not be too caught up with this, that, I will be able to say it better, or, we will need to amplify their voice. So that's first, but I had to let it out. The second part is, what if they are not able to tell their story? So there, I think there is responsibility there. Number one, don't act like God, and don't believe that just because you're doing this. So there is that fear that sometimes acting like God. Number two, belief in the story. You need to believe in the story. And when belief is there, it comes out as authentic. Remember that the story is not about you, and that's most important, that it's not your story, that the story is not about you. So when people come and congratulate you, remember, for a great talk, you are just the teller of the story, you are the sutradhar. The character in the story is some other stakeholder, and remembering that is the most important thing. Then comes the other issues of ethics and aesthetics, and the on not dramatizing, keeping it authentic. All of these form a part of, storytelling is responsibility, and it's to be done done like that. It's a powerful, we talked about the power of storytelling, so it's so powerful. With power comes great responsibility.
Yes. So I completely agree with you about, the most powerful story is something that is told by the person who owns that story. And we ourselves, being storytellers, of course, uh, uh, we look at ways of equipping others to tell their own stories. Obviously, when they are speaking with their own voice, there is nothing that is lost in translation. And it's not about language, as you so wonderfully pointed out as well. It's not about being able to speak perfect English or any other language for that matter. It is to be able to be authentic to the experience that you're talking about as a storyteller. So there are stories which are hard to be told, primarily because maybe they are hard stories to have been experienced as well. I mean, so do you think that, for example, people who have been either trafficked or have, been rescued from bonded labor, these are hard experiences. There are so many other hard experiences, yes, but are there any ways that we can actually prepare, according to you, prepare our, people whom we work with who have had hard experiences to tell their stories?
When the court came into the scene, and uh, you know homosexuality didn't have legal remit in India for a long time. And when the court came into the scene and gave legal remit, the first few voices that came out immediately after that, and there needs to be celebration, because people were living in a pressure cooker situation for a long time. So at some level, pressure cooker will burst. But when I just look back at the last few months, what I have seen is that the initial voices were a little rough on the edges. They were either too celebratory, too much in your face, too much in your, and perhaps, in the short term, there is an overreaction always. But over a period of time, I think the community has also realized that if we want to make a real connect, I don't want to make others uncomfortable with my lifestyle choices. I want them to be comfortable with my lifestyle choices. Now, there is a big distinction. Let me say this again. Most of the people in the community have this desire that I don't want to make others uncomfortable with my lifestyle and sexuality choices. I want them to be comfortable with my choice. If that becomes your starting point, how will you tell the story? It's only when you want to make others uncomfortable that you will be in your face, that you will provoke, that you will, use a certain language, that you will use a certain tonality. So what is your intent? It all boils back to boils down to this. What is the intent? And if my intent is that I want people to be comfortable, then I will look at similarities, not differences. At least my starting point will be that, I and you, we come from the same world. We are not different. Let's focus on all the things that are similar. And you will find that I am not different from you. Versus, focusing on lack of similarities. So coming back to the, now the question and why I use this example, because sometimes, these concepts are best illustrated through examples. So when I'm talking about difficult topics, what is my intent? Do I want to provoke? Do I want to shock people? Then you will use a certain tonality which is in your face. But if that's not your intent, if your intent is empathy, then what tonality would you use? If your intent is compassion, if your intent is that people should care, that people should become, first of all, that people should be aware that some things happen, and that some things happen not just to certain kind of people but random people. It's a lottery, like I said. It's a twist of fate, it's a quirk of fate. You've seen the movie Lion, right? Based on a true story, that kid who's growing up in a certain kind of family with all the security of a family just happens to visit a certain neighborhood, and then gets separated, gets into a jail, gets into an orphanage, and eventually lands up in Australia or somewhere. Just a moment is all it takes. So now when you're going to tell that story, will you tell that with shock value or with empathy value? Just start with that intention and the story will come out well.
Right. You did make a very quick mention to, the last 5-6 months. And yes, of course, a lot of narratives have changed in the last 5-6 months in the wake of the pandemic and the wake of the lockdowns. And of course, one of the communities that has, been the subject of a lot of storytelling is the community of the migrant laborers. There has to be a way of us changing perceptions and creating a new narrative of that particular community. What did you think about the storytelling that was revolving around this community?
Branding issue to start with, migrant. Where are you from, Prashanti?
My parents are from Andhra Pradesh.
You live and work in Bangalore now?
Yes, I do.
Aren't you a migrant?
Yes, I am.
And you earn economic fruit for the labor that you provide. So aren't you migrant labor in that sense, from an economist perspective?
Yes, and that's the way we've woven into the story, that migrant laborers were not only the daily wage workers, who have come into the city or to different cities, have migrated across the country in search of employment. Of course, that makes each one of us, or many of us, migrants as well.
So
There's been so
Dina's
much
on
of.
this call. Absolutely right. So you're absolutely right. Dina's on this call. She is from Kerala. She's migrant labor. Let me, I'll talk about 5 of my friends, close friends. I have a friend called Bala Girsabala, uh, who's the head of Techstars, which is a VC firm in India. Bala is an American citizen, lives in my neighborhood, few houses away from mine. He's from Andhra Pradesh. He went to the US. He became a citizen, but he lives and works in India. Isn't he migrant? Of course he is. I have another close friend. His name is Bala Srinivasa. He's the founder of a VC firm called Arkham. He grew up in various parts of India. His parents were Indian. He studied at BITS Pilani, went to the US, got a green card, became a citizen, lives and works in India. He's a migrant. He's migrant, and his labor produces economic rewards for him. Naren Dubey, who lives right across my house, is the founder of Scan Cafe, and he's an American citizen, studied at BITS Pilani. Sumit Dhar, another friend of mine, is Kashmiri, and his parents left Kashmir during the when Kashmiri Pandits left Srinagar. His parents also left Srinagar, and he now lives in Bangalore. And he works in IT, and he's a sales head. He's also migrant labor. So who are we to call these guys migrant laborers as if they are the other and we are some other? And by using that language, we are creating an otherness. around this. And otherness is the key to separation and is the wall that comes in the way of empathy. When we break that wall and we see us as equally impacted, haven't people working in startups like Ola and Airbnb, how many jobs have been lost? Right? Migrant laborers there also who've lost jobs. Ola and Uber, haven't people lost jobs? Yes, they have lost jobs. So, first of all, we create a sense of otherness by calling them migrant laborers. Two, we attribute causes to their actions and the false that अनपढ़ लोग हैं, illiterate हैं, तो वो लोग ऐसे ही करेंगे, वो लोग तो जाएंगे. So as if literate people have been doing all the right things by not wearing seat belts, by not using helmets, by having unsafe sex. So by attributing a cause to the actions, by saying that it is lack of literacy, that is the second wall that we create. It is not lack of literacy that 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 led to this. It is lack of something else, far more fundamental. And that we are not talking about. That when there is no hope left, no hope, and life depends on hope. People give up lives when there is no hope. So it is not lack of literacy, it is not lack of income, but it is absolute lack of hope that makes people act in certain way, that makes people fearless, where people risk their lives to do something. So I think a certain, deeper, people, let me say this, sweeter water comes from deeper wells. And same is true for stories. Sweeter water comes from deeper wells. If you have to tell a story well, you have to dig deep. And the first surface of the story is migrant, the nomenclature. The second is this attribution to lack of literacy. Then the third is something else. But you have to keep dig. And then you get to sweeter water and say, this is the story. Now, this is the articulation that needs to go out there. Yeah, so we have to take charge of that story by digging deep. Otherwise, stories remain at surface level. And in any case, news media, etc., they don't have time for depth. So they will run with, because there's so much pressure on breaking 9 o'clock news that whatever you get, you'll run with it. So the responsibility is on people who work in the social impact space, that they dig deep and find the right articulation for that story, and ensure that the story gets told in the way that it deserves to be told.
So you've hit the nail right on the head, Amin, by saying that, it is the way we tell the story as well. And words, of course, the nomenclature that we use is so pivotal to how a story is told. Like you articulated in the beginning as well, that it is truth told well, truth well told. So you brought me back to, you've actually articulated the question and the answer together by saying that, how do we tell this story, which shows that there is a requirement for new storytelling, even on this particular issue. I also want to just quickly point out that now, because of the lack of so many other forms of storytelling, maybe the digital world has taken on such a huge prominence. And there's a question here from the audience about that. Manju Lakshmi Panikar asks, we are in a situation where digital storytelling tools are gaining prominence and at our disposal. How can we use technology effectively to deliver a true transformational storytelling experience?
So the best storytellers in any era have worked with that era's cutting edge technology. And technology has always been an enabler in storytelling. You go back to cave paintings and you will see that the earlier stories that were told, Bhimbetka, etc., across the world, you will find cave paintings. Now, cave paintings require the ability to make dye or the ability to carve in stone. That requires some technology. And it's only those who embrace the technology uh, and the art form whose stories will be remembered for long. uh, Raja, when he started composing music and I'm looking at, musicians as storytellers here, he used new technology, the best technology available at that time. When A.R. Rahman came on the scene and he disrupted, he brought new sound, not just new sensibility. And that new sound came with new technology. Today, Amit Trivedi, is breaking new ground in music. He does that with new technology. So embrace the new technology. Don't see it as a challenge, but see it as an opportunity. That it's only those who have worked with newer mediums and new technologies whose stories have made an impact. So look at it as an opportunity rather than as a challenge. Now, each technology will have its own medium, each which will have its own sort of language, will have its own challenges. So work out the engagement model for that medium. Let me give an example. When Twitter came on the scene, a lot of people said, "Oh, Twitter is becoming big. How can I tell stories on Twitter? It's so difficult. Only 140 characters. How can I tell a story in 140 characters?" But people have been telling stories. In fact, the shortest story in the world is attributed to Ernest Hemingway. 6-word story. Ernest Hemingway. 6-word story. Here's how it goes. For sale, comma, baby shoes, comma, never worn. Once again, for sale, baby shoes never worn. Now, why are these baby shoes for sale? What happened to the baby? All left to the reader's interpretation. So, when Twitter came about, people started thinking, is it possible to tell a story? Now, there's this fantastic organization called Terribly Tiny Tales. They said, we'll tell stories in 140 characters, and their stories started going viral. And they went so viral that, people started sending contributions, and now they sit pretty and they just choose the right stories and put them up. We do, on Twitter and on Instagram, a format called super short stories told in very few words. We, in fact, ran that workshop for Cry, and they used it on their social media platform for quite a bit. So, and their viewership increased and their donations increased, and all of that. We got feedback from Cry. So, that's just one example. Devdutt Patnaik, the mythologist, has told the Mahabharata in 36 tweets. 36 tweets, such a long story. So make the medium, embrace the medium, and then find ways to excel in that medium. It's like test match and T20. You have to adapt to the new medium.
Yes. We've been speaking a lot about storytelling. Do you also read? And if you do read, what have you been reading lately? Are there any recommendations that you could make to us and the viewers about what you've been reading lately?
Well, I read a book by Tahir Shah who writes about Sufism. His father, actually, Idris Shah, used to write about Sufism, and so I've been reading their books. And I'm reading, currently rereading actually a book about A.R. Rahman, where he's in conversation with Nasreen Munni Kabir, uh, and she talks about music and songs and how they are composed and the challenges of storytellers in various domains. She's also had one book where she's in conversation with Gulzar Saab, the poet, and that's also very enriching. So these are the 2-3 books on my reading list right now. But more than reading, I would say a skill that, and I'm diverting the question away from me, is that the skill that a good storyteller needs is listening. And you are not a storyteller if you don't have the ability to listen. I haven't seen or found a good storyteller worth his or her salt who's not first a good listener. So let me tell a story here. This story is about one of the largest NGOs in the world called BRAC. BRAC, BRAC, operates out of Dhaka, one of the countries that they operate. They're headquartered in Dhaka. and they were doing some work with refugees from Myanmar, after the Rohingya who crossed the borders and went into uh, Dhaka. So there are camps and settlements where they are living, poor living conditions. People have run and escaped with whatever they could salvage. So there are people who have got a stove, a radio, a small black and white television, a small trunk which they escaped with, etc. And so this lady from BRAC was going around uh, meeting the stakeholders on the ground, senior officer. And then she came across at a tent an 8 or 9 year old girl, and she asked the girl, uh, "Beta, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And the girl said, "I want to be a television. Auntie, I want to be a television when I grow up." Now, most people would just laugh that off and just move on, saying, "I don't know how to respond to that." That's not listening. Deep listening is about understanding what is being said and also understanding the unspoken, knowing that something else is happening here. So she paused and she said, Beta, why would you want to be a television when you grow up? She didn't go away. She figured, deep listening. It's not what the words that are being said, but something else. She said, why do you want to be a television? And the girl said, when the television speaks, when it is switched on, everybody listens. What is unspoken is for you to understand.
Absolutely.
Then she said, look at the television. The television in our tent. It's just a tent. It's absolutely clean. And the unspoken is for you to imagine. Good listening is about listening to what is being said and what is also unsaid. And then you will find the stories worth telling from the ground.
In true Amin Haq style, you have brought us into the art of storytelling beautifully. I mean, the way you have articulated this last part. I love the story, and I love the story, the way it has been told. I think through these conversations that we have had, your points about truth well told has kept shining through. And I think that's something that we as the listeners of this conversation are going to take away with us. Thank you so much for giving us this evening, and we really appreciate the honesty with which you have spoken, the authenticity of your own story. So, just one last question, Amin. Being the storyteller and being the creator of a new story, always in your mind, you must have your next chapter already planned, do you?
Yeah. So, some half baked things and half baked ideas are always there. So they're not one, but a lot of half-baked things. One of the things that is in the pipeline is a course for parents as storytellers. And a lot of parents, they are spending a lot of time at kids at home. Their kids are on screens, parents are on screens, and uh, I, I want to help parents become better storytellers and actually become storytellers in the first place and read stories and tell stories to children. And one would wonder, why would we do that? It's actually uh, you know in some ways it seems ironical that we should be doing this, because that's our business, to be telling stories to children. And we are saying that, no, we don't want to tell stories to children, we'd rather you tell stories to children. But that's how it should be, because Amin uncle will always be there to tell stories to children, and many professional storytellers will be there. Geeta auntie will be there, Nupur auntie will be there, or some other storyteller, Jiva auntie will be there. But when you were a kid, I'm sure your parents took you out to some restaurants to eat. Asian food. They must have taken you out, a Chinese restaurant, to a McDonald's or a burger, a Wimpy's, or they would have taken you to an Indian restaurant or a South Indian restaurant. But which food do you crave and miss the most? Your grandmother's cooking, your dad's barbecue, your mom's cooking. Similarly, whose memories should, what stories should the children grow up on? Amin uncles, that guy is a professional storyteller. Your parents' storytelling. where dad becomes a lion and brings that story. So in some ways, we are cutting off our revenue stream, but we are saying, parents should be storytellers. You tell the story. If you don't tell, kids will listen to uncle only. That's not the way it should be. So that's one of the projects that we are working on. Then there's some work with social sector uh, and the impact sector. So we are teaching a course at Amani Institute to change makers. That course is under development, so it's constantly work in progress. Uh, there's also some work that needs to be done in mental health space. So these are some of the areas that are on slow burn.
Wonderful, wonderful, Amin. You know that, I mean, we are your constant followers, and we are interested to see what the Amin Haq story unfolds like. And you can be assured of our well wishes all the time. Wishing you well in every project, every story that you undertake, every story you start, every story you tell, and every story you live as well. So thank you once again for such an entertaining and fun-filled and insightful evening and conversation. Thank you, Amin.
Thank you so much. May each one of you be a fantastic storyteller. More importantly, may each one of you be a better listener. Then you will know which story to tell. May the power of authentic stories always be with you.